of my favorite and most disturbing episodes of Doctor Who is Season 4 of the reboot, Episode 11, titled Turn Left. It depicts a dystopian, alternate reality where the Doctor dies, and Rose has to convince Donna to save the world through a simple decision: to turn left instead of turn right. Mundane life circumstances are also at odds with Donna's decision-making, but ultimately, the fate of the world is dependent on one woman's decision. So is the fate of yours. Or mine. Though I'd like to think we're not all walking around with giant, somewhat invisible beetles on our backs. We all do carry something that bugs us. Pun intended. Scenarios we can't help but fantasize about if we had perhaps made a different decision, had turned left. If we are comprised of all of our past experiences which then lead to the decisions we make, then one comforting thought could be that we would walk through life on the same path as we already have, our footsteps etched in the sand, never straying from their predestined pattern. But what if we could walk in all different directions at once? Forget left. What if I go up, into the ocean, out of a cave, through a jungle? What if there were no limits to which direction I could walk? I could see all the lives I could have lived if I had turned everywhere. All I have to do is die. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Neverland Book Club. Now, you all know how much I love books that make you think yourself into a fun little panic attack at 3 in the morning when you have to get up for work at 6. Just to continue to contemplate the presented idea in your mind palace until the idea exhausts all mental energy and you're left just an exhausted pile of sweaty nonsense under your bed the following 3 a.m. in a perfectly torturous, cyclical experience. What book is that, so I may avoid it? I heard you ask somewhere. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Now, dear viewer, despite my masochistic reading habits, I did enjoy the experience of reading this book, though I do have some complaints. Let us begin with a quick synopsis. We have our main character, Nora Seed, living a life of mediocrity. A life that may have had potential at some point, but had gotten lost along her journey through existence. Not happiness, not bliss, not even the settling satisfaction of just breathing, just existence. Her life is in no way one to envy or covet. Through a series of unfortunate events, the loss of her cat, her job, her will to live, literally, she finds herself at the edge of this plane of existence. In a library. The shelves go on forever. Books endlessly lined side by side of various sizes and titles. She finds one other person in the library, a familiar face that informs her she is approaching her death. She has not yet arrived, though, and has a choice to make. Well, hundreds of choices. Thousands. An infinite amount of choices to make, to live all the lives she never had the courage to live in her own timeline. Among all of our lives, we have infinite possibilities within us that could have rippled an additional infinite universe by which we are everywhere, and anything imaginable and unimaginable. And though it may not always be a library, at the penultimate stop of our train ride of life, we are given the opportunity to see, experience, live all of those possibilities. We must only make a decision. In the beginning of the novel, we are introduced to the basics of Nora's life. Her cat, her co-workers, her ex-boyfriend, her brother, her band, her dreams that remained midnight possibilities. And here, in the Midnight Library, she finally has the ability to see all of these aspects of her life come together or fall apart. She starts by opening the Book of Regrets, a heavy, large book that trembles her already shaking arms. This book gives the inspiration of different lives to try on for size, to see what could have been. She chooses her first regret, and the bookshelves slide themselves into place, presenting the requested scenario in the form of a hardback. She is told by the familiar librarian that she needs only to start reading, and she will be in the world of such regret. And so she does, and finds that in each book, once she feels the world has done what it can for her peace of mind, she is returned to the library to continue this final therapist session. The Book of Regrets begins to shrink as she lives out her rock star life, her Alaskan adventure, her fulfilling life as a wife and mother, and finds that none of these lives are perfect. Because no life is. It simply doesn't exist. In all its vastness, In all its infinite glory, the Midnight Library can only speak the truth. As much as a decision to do or say one thing rather than another creates the reality in which we live, the decision to react to presented scenarios is also at play when determining the outcome of one's life. Outlook, perspective, play their own roles in deciding fate. Since emotions are also considered decisions, you could essentially choose to be happy with your life choices, which is also a choice, and a lot easier said than done. However, there are infinite sides to this coin. It's like a Bitcoin. Based on standard action and reward learning while growing up, we are programmed to believe that no matter what we do, we could have done that thing differently, better. And so, in that respect, we have all failed before we even try. We have failed as soon as the thought or idea has been conceived. We fail ourselves with the expectations that we may have an impact in any way, shape, or form. If everything you do matters, doesn't that respectively mean nothing you do matters? Hello, my name is Nadia. This is my existential crisis. Thank you and good night. Okay, here's the thing about the book, though. None of what I've just said is really in the book. Yes, these thoughts I've just forcibly shared with you all was initiated by my decision to read the book. However, to me, the novel itself was not nearly as deep. Remember in the beginning of the video, before I turned into a puddle of melted rainbows, I said I didn't like it entirely? This is why. Our main character, Nora, is boring. She's boring and has the personality of a damp paper towel I use to heat up my spaghetti. Might have a little flavor on it, but only through its dampness touching something else with actual flavor. The only flavorful thing about her character is that it was voiced by the great Carey Mulligan, another Doctor Who treasure. Now, the book itself was written well. It had its moments of reflection and a pretty solid character development arc. However, it lacked in the parts that count, for me. Personally. All of the philosophical questions and concepts I was excited about when first starting my read was never really addressed. Nothing in Nora's journey felt deeper than surface level until she got to the reality with her potential daughter. And even then, it was just as simple. She never belonged in any of these lives because she never earned the right to live them. She couldn't step into herself being a doctor or a scientist or a rock star because she never actually went through the steps in the sand that led to these lives. And therefore, you could live an infinite variety of different lives, but none of them, as dreamy as they can be, will fit. Only yours will. And in her reality, Nora's life was a bit boring. The concept is fun to think about, but if put into practice, it's actually rather cruel. Not only to the version of you living out these undeserved lives, but to the infinite number of yous that are missing out on their earned life while you try it on for size. All of this just to end up back at midnight, back to another decision of whether or not you'd like to continue on the path you're currently on or finalize your previous decision to die. And actually, when I think about it, isn't this opportunity to see all the things you could have been a bit too depressing for someone who ended up here because they decided to end the life they were living? And yes, that could be my cynical brain emptying half the cup rather than filling it. But still, in my head, the library doesn't work the way it had intended. The library is the final nail in a coffin you've been building your entire life, conscious or not. And I should probably add, when Nora steps into one of the lives of the library, she only steps into it from that point on. It's not like she can go back in time when she's a kid and live out the entire life. She has to live it out from that moment in that timeline on. So that should be explained. Now, I will admit, perhaps I have put more thought into this book after finishing it than Matt Haig had intended. But for a person like myself who has experienced loss in more than many ways, and who uses humor as a defense mechanism for underlying psychological trauma, I couldn't help but overanalyze and pick and pick and pick at the introduced idea of an infinite library at the end of one's life filled with all of the possible what-ifs. I can't help but think about what my life might have been like if I decided to get on the plane. Any plane. Get in the car. Go to that school. Say no. Say yes. Say hello. Say goodbye. Live. In all the ways I feel I've been too fearful to live in this life. In the life I'm living now, where I have earned where I am. Both half full and half empty, I have earned this life. It was not handed to me in a book at the end of my life. It was worked for. And for that, despite all the things I could have been if I weren't me, I don't think I would have wanted anything else. I would be taking away from the me that earned her own reality. And I love her too much to do that to her. Hello? The one thing I do like to fantasize about endlessly is if I could go back in time in this life. I'd do just a few things differently, sure. I'd spend more time with my grandmother while I can. I'd see the signs of certain things before it was too late and warn myself and loved ones. But one thing I do for sure, and I think I've said this before on this channel, I'd find Pablo, just to have a few extra years with him before now. Alright, now, who should read this book? Who was this written for? Well, to be honest, I think this book was written for Matt Haig. I can't think of anyone writing something like this other than an experiment or some sort of outlet for themselves to analyze their own life choices, which is exactly what writing is when stripped down to its ink. Writing is, and forever will be, therapy. Whether you're writing the 10th book in your epic series or a journal entry at the end of a terrible day that's just one sentence long, it doesn't matter. Writing is unfiltered reflection. So, as much as I have gained in philosophical perspective from this book due to its underlying concepts, I believe the story itself was unimportant to the enjoyment of the book, and is therefore still worth reading. And for that, I believe Matt Haig wrote this for himself, and for everyone who enjoys a touch of psychological masochism. Like me. As mentioned before and is mentioned in the book, the idea of the library is just a conduit for organizing the infiniteness of all the possible lives. It is not presented as a library for everyone. For some, it's a video store with movies instead of books. I suppose for others it could be filing cabinets with files or photo albums with photos. Or post-it notes, or an email database. But now we're just being silly. Either way, I think for us readers, what else could it possibly be other than a library? Maybe a forest where every tree is a different life, and you have to climb it to get some perspective. Damn, I should write something like that. So, if you are like me, read The Midnight Library, but not for the plot. Read for the perspective. Are you a I read half of the book today, or a I have half of the book left to read kind of person? Because for me, I feel like I fluctuate between the two depending on the story. Alright, that's enough philosophical mumbo-jumbo food today. Thank you all so much for watching and sitting with me through yet another existential crisis. You are all my therapists and I appreciate your time. Please don't bill me. Please leave your notes down below and any ink blots you may have on hand. Today's shoutout goes to Richie Tozier. Your last name is funnily similar to one of my favorite modern musical artists that speaks to my soul in a way none other born before the early 1900s has. Ariana Grande. That was a joke. It's Hosier. I hope you've had as much fun and as much luck as I have getting through your August TBR list, my dear Richie. I hope to give you even more reading suggestions in the future, so do stay tuned, and thank you for your lovely comments. I'm off to go slip into a comfortable zoned stare under my bed and fantasize about being sent back to my childhood knowing everything I already know now, and taking advantage of every opportunity to say yes I never took. Stay lost, keep reading, choose happiness, dear viewers. Goodbye!